What? All throughout history, we've been alone, struggling to meet our basic needs. As a single cell, we struggled to survive. When we were fish, we struggled to survive. On land, we struggled to survive. Finally, we'd had enough of this lone survival strategy. We found that it was easier to survive when we worked together. Crazy idea, right? Well, this is that story. The story of how we work together to compile our collective knowledge and create civilization. There are a few key commonalities between all civilizations, and they all seem to converge in a few areas. Let's journey back to ancient times when we have Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, and the Mediterranean civilizations to see how trade impacted our survival. Take for example Egypt. We have a seriously booming culture. There's a huge trade network between many of the Mediterranean civilizations, all dispersed along the Nile. Now, what does this have to do with today? Well, Egypt traded grain, gold, and cedar logs all throughout. It was helping meet people's basic needs, which would have been a very big deal at that point. It seems a common theme throughout history that we're dependent on our natural environment. Every civilization was at the mercy of nature and luck. Egypt was very successful in ancient times, taking the rank of the largest civilization up to that point. They developed writing, paper, and much more, all because they had a hierarchical system in which they were able to organize themselves and their civilization. The reason for their growth was farming and agriculture. As with every agrarian civilization, it provides the resources they need to control in order to build complex social hierarchies. In fact, it seems that it always happens this way. You see, Egypt was very lucky. The early settlers decided to dig large canals for irrigation. This gave their plants water. It gave way to the fertile soil that was needed to develop large-scale agriculture. Egypt's success was based on prior work, a common theme that takes us to Aztecs in Mesoamerica. When Teotihuacan, a culture who flourished by monopolizing the trade of obsidian, fell to ruins, it was a new civilization called the Aztecs who stumbled upon its magnificence. After being awestruck by the sight of giant pyramids, irrigation, and plumbing systems, the Aztecs believed that this was the site of the gods and named it Tenochtitlan, their new capital. Their success was built upon the work done by those who came before them, enabling them to take advantage of farming as well as trade. We don't know why the Teotihuacan civilization fell, but it could be the result of internal or external conflict, or because they, as all of us, were at the mercy of nature, plagues and droughts being some of the most common reasons civilizations fall. What about China, a civilization that was sheltered from the rest of the world because of the large mountains in the west? This meant they couldn't expand much. On the other hand, they didn't have to worry about another civilization taking them over either. That is, until the Mongols. The Chinese had to focus on internal growth, so they had periods of heavy government involvement and enormous tax. It had many periods of instability, which broke it up into smaller regions, and then reunited many times in history. Because of China's huge success in agriculture and their large resulting population, they didn't need to industrialize. It was more efficient for China to use their enormous slave power. A much different story for the unimpressive post-Rome Europe. The need for efficiency with less manpower brought forth what we call as the modern Industrial Revolution. One of the most important advantages Europe had was the need for constant innovation. It pushed them to develop steam engines and factories, while the rest of the world was still producing most, if not all, of their products, with slaves and laborers. What bred this innovation was Eurasian trade. Ideas spread and our collective knowledge grew exponentially. Most of the world was in a race, trying to conquer each other, pushing to conflict and competition. You see, most people want to be seen in a higher status than others. Why is this? What is it about status that's so enticing for us humans? An answer is hidden in our evolution, the history of gold, and the color purple. Why is it that a dye, when colored purple, was only worn by nobility? And how was it worth its weight in gold? And what about gold itself? Let's think about that for a second. What makes gold valuable? Does it have any intrinsic value as a metal? It's not strong like steel. It wasn't used for arrowheads, construction, or anything we might think of using a normal metal for. Yet, wars have been fought over it. People have been oppressed and enslaved for it. The main reason that gold is valuable is because it's been a very scarce resource throughout history. Think about that for a second. The reason we value gold today is because it's been a scarce resource. It gives those who own it a pretty way to show off their superiority and wealth. There have been many times in the past when precious metals became less scarce. In Spain, silver was so valuable that the Spaniards found a silver mountain in America, and with riches on the horizon, they eventually forced slaves to mine day and night, shipping huge reserves back to Spain. Despite all the riches they'd brought back, Spain went into an economic crisis. In fact, these Spaniards had caused inflation by devaluing silver, making it less scarce. So we can understand that the value of something does not necessarily belong to its true value in the economy, but can also be perceived value. Often led by the wealthy, it can be a sign that some have the ability to throw money away at something beautiful, like gold and silver. The story of the color purple seems to confirm this theory. What was it about the color purple that made it so valuable to cultures that it became a sign of nobility and royalty? For centuries, purple dye was traded in the ancient Phoenician city of Tyre. It was worth a serious amount of coin. You see, they derived the color purple from a species of snail known as Bulinus brandarius. Dye makers had to crack open the snail shell, extract a purple-producing mucus, and expose it to sunlight for a precise amount of time. It took around 250,000 mollusks to produce just 1 ounce of usable dye. The result was a beautiful, vibrant, and long-lasting shade of purple. So we see again, due to scarcity, it became a sign of status. This brings us again to the question of why do people want status anyway? Well, we can look to evolution for an answer. You see, animals with more intricate patterns and colors can represent higher levels of health and make them more attractive to a mate. It becomes apparent that having a higher status gives the ability to procreate more easily, one form of survival. The lion also comes to mind. The strongest, with the loudest roar, gets the ability to mate. They get the first bite of the kill, and get to decide who eats and who doesn't. To humans, individual strength was once an important advantage. Yet, for civilizations, individual physical strength is not as necessary. This is seen clearly with the reign of King Tutankhamun, who most of us have heard about. A product of inbreeding. He needed a cane to walk, he had a hunchback, and was really small. Contrary to what early historians thought, he seems to have played a much larger role in Egyptian civilization. In 1 decade or less, he had the reign and power to undo the religious policies of his father, to re-establish the god Amun at the top of the pantheon, establishing order to a fragmented state. He moved the capital from Akhenaten to Thebes, and his foreign policy decisions made sure that Egypt remained a genuine Afro-Eurasian power. He did this all despite his debilitating health problems, proving no matter how weak a human is, the strength of his civilization is more important. You can argue that it's possible that he was just a face, and that his accomplishments could be the work of clever manipulation or even force. The fact still remains that collective military strength is much more important than individual strength. And just as some species have bright colors and strength to represent health, so too do civilizations. They have plenty of gold and military strength, making them more attractive for trade. Civilization, a collective that acts as one identity, pushing us further and further toward meeting our human needs. What an incredibly precious idea. It's a true feat of human persistence, innovation, and organization. Along with its beauty comes the other side: military, wars, and taxation, all being fundamental aspects of the system, though there have been varying levels, challenging the ideas of the past where complete rule was the only way. One being democracy, used by the great civilization Rome. Borrowed from Greece, it was a system that worked, at least like all systems, until it was infected with too much corruption. Many of Rome's problems can be traced back to a war when a man named Hannibal penetrated the Italian peninsula. A large number of the small farms had been destroyed. Many farmers were recruited as military soldiers. Then, after the war, they became part of the unemployed population called the proletariat. Wealthy senators bought up the farmland and used it to grow cash crops like olive oil and wine instead of grain, working their estates with prisoners of war and slave labor, which further exacerbated the problem of the unemployed. The senators were also appointed governors of local provinces, where they took advantage of easy corrupt profits and made sure their elite colleagues received lucrative government contracts to supply armies and materials. Despite there being many contributing factors to the fall of civilizations, many can be derived from war or natural disasters, like plagues and droughts. Weakened by the loss of manpower, or wiped out by war, vacuums of power give way to corruption. More often than not, the natural world seems to have a large say. Sometimes it's as simple as developing a civilization in the wrong area. Water has always been the source of life. Praised in most cultures, it's the most important commodity to living species, without which we can't hydrate, nor can our food. About 14,000 years ago, there was a city named Jericho. It was one of the first civilizations we know of. Though it was eventually conquered in war, it had a fruitful longevity, the result of natural luck. You see, the city of Jericho was not close to the ocean or a river, and water being one of the most important resources, it seems to be an unlikely spot. Why is it that they survived, when just 2,500 miles northwest, there was another civilization called Anua, an oasis with water flowing from the Kopidag Mountains? Why is it that Jericho was so much more successful? Well, the unfortunate truth for Anua residents was that they had to keep searching for new sources of water as climatic conditions in the region changed, moving or drying up their sources of water. While Jericho was built on top of a spring that has not dried up to this day. One must look no further than the time of the dinosaurs to see how dependent we are on the natural world. A seemingly unchallengeable species brought to extinction so abruptly has its similarities in civilizations of the past, something that seems all too real today with the coronavirus. Plagues and droughts have destroyed civilizations throughout history. We have survived through all natural disasters, making us one of the luckiest species to inhabit Earth. Humans have the rare ability to adapt quickly. On top of that, our ability for collective learning helps us adapt even faster, one of the main reasons for our success. All the knowledge of the previous generations can be the groundwork for new innovations. Toolmaking was once thought to be what makes us human, though today it's not a good enough measurement due to the increasing amount of tool-using species we've discovered, some of which include birds, apes, and ants. A better measurement is our unique ability to build and accumulate knowledge and understanding. The more contact we have with diverse humans and cultures, the more ideas can spread, germinate, and lead to new ideas and innovations. One part of this puzzle is conflict. When there's conflict, there's competition. People, cultures, or civilizations are striving to be on top, striving to gain more power. This pushes innovation. Looking back at China, under the Han Dynasty, it grew into a huge empire that stretched from Vietnam to Korea and from the China Sea deep into Central Asia. When it entered into trade with Eurasia for the first time, the Han were responsible for the world's first wheelbarrow, the first water mill, a type of seismometer to measure the strength of earthquakes, extraordinarily accurate astronomical observations, piston bellows to assist the manufacture of high-quality iron, and paper. All incredibly important innovations were the result of competition and trade, though internal corruption of the court and emperor, along with massive locust swarms and devastating floods, eventually led to Han's demise after 400 years of rule. Another example of conflict in a more modern time is the Cold War. It led humans to the stars. So competition has birthed some of the most important technologies for the future of humanity, building upon our collective knowledge. So, in conclusion, civilization is a very complex system. It's been evolving for a long time. It's helped us go from lonely beings to complexly organized groups. Zooming out and looking at civilization from a big picture perspective can show us some of the common themes for their evolution. Firstly, we're dependent on the luck of the environment we find. If we happen to have the right conditions and enough water, we can develop agriculture for more energy. With this comes concentrated power, and monopolies form to control the trade and distribution of the resources while funding themselves through taxes. This leads to hierarchical organization with kings, emperors, or presidents at the top, keeping order with varying levels of power. Lastly, internal and/or external conflicts that might arise from the need for natural resources can lead to innovation, corruption, and wars. We can see these same themes develop independently in the Americas and Eurasia, intertwining themselves into every large civilization of history. Civilization is the product of the collective knowledge of humanity. We're truly just making it up as we go. Ingenuity and innovation can give way to the variety of different routes to civilization and beyond. Research one person does for the pure sake of intellectual curiosity can lead to impossibly imaginable progress. To pursue the understanding of something for the pure sake of it being itself, without bias, without needing anything from it, is actually one of the most pure forms of love and appreciation of this world. We can all strive to understand the universe better, in whatever way makes sense to us. Whether you're interested in understanding humans, emotions, technology, the natural world, follow that spark. In doing so, you're helping the evolution and advancement of civilization itself. The Greeks' intellectual curiosity in the properties of air would be the groundwork for a revolution thousands of years later, one industrial in nature. I want to know what you're interested in pursuing. Comment down below. Let me know. Stay tuned for the next episode in this series, where we'll explore how Europe took over and the advent of modern trade. And as always, keep our curiosity alive.